Bloomberg Tech is live from coast to coast with Caroline Hyde in New York and Ed Ludlow in San Francisco.
This is Bloomberg Tech. I'm Caroline Hyde in New York, and let's go straight to our top story today, the war with Iran. The conflict continues to reverberate across the Middle East today. This as President Trump says the bombing campaign against Iran could last for weeks. We are awaiting more updates from the president this hour, but we want to bring you the latest. Bloomberg's Dan Williams, who is in Jerusalem. On the ground there in Israel, Dan, what is it like?
Well, as you can see, the sun is set on what has been the third day of this extraordinary war, a war that appears to be widening, engulfing not just the Middle East now, but even lapping up against southern Europe, with Cyprus saying that a British airbase on its soil was apparently targeted by a Hezbollah drone, Hezbollah being the Lebanese militia ally of Iran, in fact, an ally of Iran in Lebanon, which opened a front from Lebanon with Israel, reopened that front overnight. And now the Israelis are saying they're bombing targets in Lebanon apace as they continue their bombing of Iran alongside U.S. forces. So we have several fronts opening up, a number of Gulf Arab countries that also have found themselves in the firing line, being struck by Iranian missiles and drones, and not just U.S. bases on their turf, but also hotels and the like. This is imposing a good deal of economic pain on the region, and it would appear that what the Iranian regime is trying to do, even though it's massively outgunned by its enemies, is to wait out this campaign in the hope that the pain and indeed the patience of the American public that apparently disapproves of this by quite a margin already will wear thin, and some members of the Iranian regime might be able to survive.
Talk to us about what remains of the Iranian regime, Dan.
It's very hard to know. It's the supreme leader was killed over the weekend in one of those opening salvos, and almost by the minute we've received updates about other members who have been killed, sometimes the successors of those who were recently killed. However, to judge by the cycle of fire being maintained by Iran, certainly in Israel, where we've been experiencing every half hour or a couple hours, sirens and calls to take shelter in the face of missiles or drones coming in, it would appear that there is still a vestigial state functioning, managing to keep up the fight, and presumably domestically managing to deter members of the opposition from trying to take control of the country. That is, of course, the vision enunciated both by Israel and the United States at the outset, a situation whereby the Iranian regime is sufficiently degraded, sufficiently destroyed to enable the Iranian opposition, which many in the West would see as the bulk of the Iranian population, certainly the young population, to take to the streets again as it did only a few weeks ago, but this time not facing the guns of the state and being able to assume control.
An extraordinary day in Jerusalem, as you say, a third day. Dan Williams, we so appreciate you being with us of Bloomberg. Now, let's check out what is a human story that is affecting markets right now. Nasdaq 100 off by 0.4%. Big tech is seeing some significant moves on individual names. Of course, money moving into the likes of Nvidia, Palantir, as you're seeing, up 6% as a defense-related name in the tech perspective pushes higher. These are your big points contributors on the day. And Nvidia, in fact, making a deal, putting money into optical companies. We'll dig into that a little bit later. But really, we're also seeing significant moves in other parts of the market, different industry groups, different asset classes. Brent crude, unsurprisingly, up more than 7%. Extraordinary moves as we consider the Strait of Hormuz, an issue about supply chains writ large for the globe to try and digest. Bitcoin is up by more than 5%, recovering some of its losses as it was one of the main tradable assets over the course of the weekend. And MicroStrategy is currently up 6.8% on the back of that Bitcoin buying. Let's talk about the market impact more with Ipek Oskudeskaya, Swissquote senior market analyst. And this is a moment of knee-jerk reaction, of risk-off sentiment. But interestingly, we are still seeing big tech managing to see some flows into it.
Exactly. What we see right now is that as the spike in oil prices is being retraced, technology companies are also finding some breathing room right now. And we also do see some individual divergences in the technology space. The companies that do have greater exposure to energy costs, like the ones that run data centers, are being hit more heavily than the others that are more or less capital intensive, like Nvidia, for example. The defense-related names are also gaining on the back of the Middle East conflict news.
Is that an automatic buying that you think will see the likes of Palantir hold on to gains going forward? Is there something that is sticky about this demand for such defense tech?
Yes, we believe that globally the defense stocks have been in demand due to the rapid shift and the significant shift in global geopolitics. And we have seen a couple of times since last year that the geopolitical tensions are not ready to ease from the actual levels. So the risks are being quite high, and the technology companies and technology and defense companies are benefiting greatly from it. It's not only in the US, but we also think that the defense stocks in Europe will also continue to benefit from the rising geopolitical tensions and risk across the globe.
I mean, what's notable is benchmarks are actually trying to turn around. I'm looking at the Nasdaq more broadly, only off by about 0.1% now. The S&P in the US currently off by 0.3%, even though we saw market falls over in Asia and European trading, EPEC. Just the macro picture for someone who is in the audience right now, trying to understand where to be navigating if they're exposed to technology names.
Well, exactly. I mean, what the big picture of today was the rapid rise that we saw in energy prices at the beginning of today's session. So the Asian and European stocks were heavily hit. But as we move on towards the US session, we see that these gains have been retraced. So some of the hawkish expectations regarding the major central banks that would be lifted, that was coming actually from the fact that the energy prices would lift. Inflation expectations are also being trimmed right now as oil prices are coming back down. And I think that that is the global macroeconomic picture that investors should understand. It is really today about the energy prices, the inflation expectations, and the impact on central bank decisions. As energy prices move lower, we are getting back to the levels of risk that we saw in the beginning of the session. Now, we are still higher in terms of energy prices, and the risk of another upside potential move and sustain gain in energy prices do persist. But at the moment, it's quite interesting to see how fast the early gains are being retraced, and the global markets are immediately readjusting to that retracement.
EPEC, what is Bitcoin acting as in this moment?
Well, it's interesting because Bitcoin has not necessarily been a risk haven or a safe haven asset over the past few weeks. It was very much in line, a trend very much in line with technology companies, and was hit along with the sell-off that we saw across the technology space. So what we see today is that the Bitcoin is actually acting as a safe haven asset, and we suspect that the regional conflict could eventually bring some capital into Bitcoin regarding maybe the tensions or the fact that the gold has been overly valued and investors may be looking for other safe haven. But to be perfectly honest with you, the move that we see in Bitcoin and decoupling of the correlation with the technology stocks is quite interesting right now, even more so as the higher energy prices should normally also have a negative impact on Bitcoin.
EPEC, it's great to catch up with you. Thank you very much indeed, EPEC.
Thank you.
EPEC Oskar is with us from Swissquote. We appreciate it. Meanwhile, coming up, we'll speak with Representative Sam Liccardo, a congressman from Silicon Valley, about the conflict in the Middle East and AI policy. Meanwhile, check out shares of Apple. There is other news happening amid, of course, the concerns in the Middle East. We're up almost 0.2% as Apple is unveiling the iPhone 17e. It's the latest version of its lower-end smartphone, faster version of an iPad Air also coming out, with the iPhone 17e including a faster processor, new in-house wireless chips. This is Bloomberg Tech. We are awaiting remarks from President Trump in Washington, who is about to participate in a public event, and we anticipate there might be some commentary regarding the war with Iran. We will be bringing you up to the moment breaking news on that subject. But within the context of Middle East, Anthropic has been saying that there's been an outage that impacted thousands of Claude users, but it's now been resolved. Reports of the issues with the chatbot came as the AI provider experiences a surge in demand, driven by the company's feud with the Pentagon over the potential use of its technology for mass surveillance and the development of autonomous weaponry. Now, Seth Wiegman of Bloomberg News, I'm pleased to say, joins us to set the context first, because while a feud has erupted between Anthropic, we've actually seen OpenAI complete a contract with the Pentagon in the use of its own AI technology. Just take us through the weekend, Seth.
Yeah, I think this has to be the most dramatic weekend we've seen in AI land since the ouster of Sam Altman a couple of years ago. But to your point, Carolyn, yes, OpenAI swooped in hours after Anthropic was effectively blacklisted by the Defense Department and said it had inked a deal with the Defense Department for classified AI work. Now, OpenAI is not saying if this replaces Anthropic's work, but they are signaling that they are comfortable with the contractual safeguards to make sure that their technology is not used for domestic surveillance or for autonomous weaponry, which were the two red lines that Anthropic really centered on and which led to this fierce standoff with the Pentagon.
It's been a standoff that has erupted online with many people calling to stop using ChatGPT, to instead shift one's attention to Anthropic's consumer apps. Now, it might be said that Claude for Enterprise hasn't been affected by the outages today. It's interesting that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has been saying that he's following President Trump's direction on Anthropic, and in the Treasury Department is terminating all use of Anthropic products. But there's reporting to show that it's, of course, still being used at the moment and was over the course of the weekend with Iran.
Yeah, I think to step back, let's just say that what seems clear is that the federal government is moving forward with rethinking its use of Claude. What's less clear is what the broader impact and blast radius will be on Anthropic from the many other businesses and companies that work with the government. To take Pete Hegseth's tweet literally, he's implying that any business that does commercial business with Anthropic must stop that if they also work with the military. But Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, said over the weekend, he thinks it's much more limited in scope. It'll just be if they do military work with Anthropic. So that remains to be seen how it's interpreted.
Still a lot of work to be done by the likes of Palantir, for example. Bloomberg's Seth Feigerman across this story. Thank you very much indeed. Now, look, US lawmakers, they're gearing up for a vote on a war powers resolution following the strikes in Iran. This is unfolding as the debate over AI use by the military continues. We're pleased to say we're joined by Representative Sam Liccardo, whose district includes parts of Silicon Valley. There is drama in Washington, where you've just got the train to us from. There is drama in where you represent as well. Can I just ask you first and foremost, what do you think the relationship of some of the companies that within your district is like evolving with the Pentagon? How do you observe what occurred over the last few days?
I think in Silicon Valley, there's a strong libertarian streak. And so there were many who were cheering to see Anthropic step up as it had. And look, there's a free market here, and the Defense Department has many competitors to choose from, and it has a right to choose whoever it wants. But it seems to me that at the end of the day, when we're talking about AI safeguards, these ought to be decisions that are not confined to backroom negotiations between lawyers at the Pentagon and individual companies. These ought to be very public discussions. The administration should be setting rules. Congress should be setting rules. And the way this all went down now with retribution against Anthropic and the way that Secretary Hegseth and others have articulated, I think is very damaging to Silicon Valley and, frankly, to the country.
In many ways, Anthropic and Dario Amodei have tried to make it a public discussion, brought it into the light. What's interesting is Dario has also said that the law has not yet caught up with AI's ability. Therein lies your role in Congress. How can Congress keep up at this moment to ensure that there aren't these blurred red lines that everyone's trying to digest from OpenAI's contract and from Anthropic's?
Well, this isn't the first time someone has said Congress is not moving at the pace of technology. We've been waiting 30 years for a data privacy bill, for protections against for protections for children online, et cetera. But the reality is this is an area where both Congress needs to act and the administration needs to act. There should be clear lines. I don't think a lot of folks argue with the lines that Anthropic articulated. In fact, OpenAI seemed to have embraced them. So why not, rather than punishing the company, hold these up as examples? This is an opportunity where the industry can inform the government, and we ought to be taking those cues.
You say OpenAI has embraced the red lines that Anthropic put forth. There's reporting to suggest that there's cynicism around that.
Yes, well, that is to be determined. I guess I'm simply relying on what I'm hearing publicly. Now, obviously, I understand why there might be cynicism. Look, the bottom line is this shouldn't be enforced by one particular CEO at one company. There's a reason why there ought to be a public discussion, because this is going to impact all of us, and certainly when we talk about issues like public surveillance.
I mean, realistically, are you able to have the time, the insight, the focus at the moment when we've got an erupting war with Iran and indeed, well, government shutdown? How effective can you be at this moment, Congressman?
Well, I'm not going to speak for Congress because, frankly, as you know, if you ever made a bet on Congress not getting anything done, you win 99 times out of 100.
Predictions markets are for that.
Yeah, they're doing pretty well. But I will say this week I'll be introducing a provision in what's called the Defense Productions Act, really to prevent any federal agency from retaliating against companies like Anthropic when they propose reasonable limits on the deployment of their technology. Technology is obviously a wonderful thing. We know it has enormous risks. We ought to take the cues from industry when industry tells us these risks are too great. Let's draw lines.
What do you think will be the support of that bill across both aisles?
We'll be discussing it this week in the House Financial Services Committee, where we're having a markup. I'm still having those conversations with my colleagues.
Okay, so maybe we can find some support that it shouldn't be down, there shouldn't be retribution, there shouldn't be sort of unprecedented moves where you deem a company a homegrown domestic champion as a supply risk in some way. But when you think more broadly about AI regulation in the hands of Congress or in the hands of the executive right now, are you comfortable with the amount of executive orders that have been deemed around AI, the way in which the administration has had to take maybe the steps necessary if the Congress void is still there?
Well, I know this president is not unique in using executive orders where Congress is failing to act. The way in which these executive orders have been deployed are deeply problematic, and certainly we've seen in many cases quite unconstitutional. Congress needs to step up, and that requires the majority party to do its job, that is to defend the prerogatives under Article 1 of the Constitution, where Congress has authority. And we've seen a host of areas, from tariffs certainly to AI, where Congress has simply not been stepping up and allowing this president to take too much of the turf. There's a reason why we want Congress to be deciding this. These are issues that have massive impacts in many communities that are diverse, communities that are simply not benefiting from AI as much as my community in Silicon Valley might be. That's why you need to have a national conversation.
You were having a national conversation before the conversation became much more of war in the Middle East and war with Iran. You were talking about how we shouldn't see Congress just slam the brakes on AI innovation. But equally, they shouldn't accelerate. There should be a way of grabbing the steering wheel, is the way you wrote it in an op-ed. Can we get some sort of bipartisan approach to grabbing a steering wheel when you say so many states are affected in different ways by AI?
I'd like to think we can. Look, there's a lot of fears right now around AI, around loss of jobs, around impacts on utility bills. There are opportunities for us to move together. For example, we know these hyperscalers need speed. Let's give them federal permits, enable them to accelerate if they're keeping ratepayers whole and protecting them from these utility, the risk of higher prices on their utility bills, and investing in batteries and the kinds of technology we know that will be sustainable, rather than simply pulling more natural gas and coal in. For example, on jobs, there are things that we can do that are bipartisan that can incentivize companies to invest in community colleges and local state universities to upskill and reskill. These are not necessarily partisan notions. This is a time for us to be thinking more creatively across the aisle on these kinds of solutions. We don't have the kind of administration now in office that is particularly bipartisan, and so it's really going to have to come from ground up.
You mentioned social media. And I think in many ways, people have felt that there's been a void of lawmaking around social media because there is so much nuance to much of this. Is there sometimes too much nuance when it comes to the likes of impact by the Pentagon's decisions on mass surveillance, on issues of autonomous weaponry, that really laws can't be made that can keep up briefly?
It's fair to say that this is incredibly complex, and you can't simply declare amateur hour and start to announce edicts that are going to apply broadly across multiple industries where the impacts may be very different. What I have been proposing, and we'll be coming out with legislation soon, is how, for example, on AI, we can essentially enable industry experts, academic experts, to be able to establish what those best practices are in an industry, allow industry to reach those best practices rather than having some kind of monolithic edict come from Congress or the administration. Government's not going to get it right. We have to acknowledge that. This is moving too fast. We need to rely on the best thinking in the industry to establish what the best practices are and then mandate that if folks can reach those, they can have the benefits, for example, of preemption. And if they don't, then they're subjected to the edicts of 50 different states.
We appreciate you stopping by.
It's great to be with you.
DC, here in New York, Representative Sam Liccardo, who represents the heart of Silicon Valley and much more in California. Now coming up, Bitcoin. It shakes off investor caution as Middle East tensions, they rattle global markets. We'll bring you more market impact next. This is Bloomberg Tech. Bitcoin staging a comeback, nearing $70,000 levels after the US and Israeli attacks on Iran shook investor confidence over the weekend. Here with the latest is Bloomberg cross-asset reporter Isabel Lee. They shake people. We're thinking of a world of war. That is not something to take lightly, but we think about the assets impacted. How is Bitcoin managing to rally through this?
Definitely behaving like a risk asset. I feel like, when you see a big pullback like that, it's eventually going to bounce back. It's now higher by around 6% after dropping as much as 63,000 over the weekend. Other less liquid, smaller coins are also in the green, higher by 6%, like Ether. The thing I love about cryptocurrency is it trades 24/7, and you really can see and use it as a risk sentiment when markets are closed. And now that we see U.S. stocks open, you see worries about an inflation resurgence. For instance, bonds are slumping, traders are trimming their Fed rate cuts, haven assets are surging, dollar, gold, oil, of course. And interestingly, higher oil prices will actually weigh on crypto prices because crypto prices are behaving like tech stocks and risk assets. And of course, those are sensitive to Fed rate moves. So everything is just interconnected, and I find that very interesting. And on top of all of this, it's a busy week for U.S. eco data. We have non-farm payrolls. We also have unemployment rate. And now, for now, we have more questions than answers. We have President Trump saying that the attacks could last a few weeks. So I think investors are just really preparing themselves for the tail risk events and preparing for worst case outcomes. But at least for now, Bitcoin is nearing 70,000.
You keep us prepared, Isabel Lee. We appreciate it. On all things of the market's reaction to a story that continues, because coming up, we will be joined by American Enterprise Institute Senior Fellow Corey Shockey on all things defense tech, geopolitics, so much more. This is Bloomberg Tech. Welcome back to Bloomberg Tech. We take a look at these markets that are currently reacting to the news over the course of the weekend. War in the Middle East, war with Iran. We're currently down on the Nasdaq 100 by some 0.5%, coming back into lows, having tried to bounce into the green on the broader indices. Nvidia is actually up more than 2% because deals are still getting done from an M&A perspective or from an investment perspective. This is as we see Nvidia making $4 billion investment in data center optics companies. That's Coherent and Lumentum. Their stocks surge. Palantir Defense Tech. There is buying of this name for obvious reasons on the day. We're up almost 6%. But CrowdStrike is also interesting. Look, our great colleagues at Bloomberg Intelligence, like Mandeep Singh, putting out really great notes, talking about how Palantir, of course, is going to see buying amid geopolitical tensions. We'll also see tailwinds for security spending, with the larger companies such as CrowdStrike, Palo Alto, likely to see some focus amid concerns about cyber attacks. We'll get into that in a little bit. But let's head back now to DC, where it's notable that the Pentagon is shifting AI providers after reaching a deal with OpenAI to deploy its models within the department's classified network. Bloomberg's senior tech editor, Mike Shepard, joins us on what is an extraordinary story that intertwines with a geopolitical story. How significant is this move that Sam Altman goes where Dario Amodei won't?
Well, it's not just significant that it happened. It's also, Carol, that it happened so quickly after the Pentagon decided that it would walk away from its relationship with Anthropic, which had been in place for roughly a year. And Anthropic had really worked itself into the classified space that is crucial for the Pentagon, being able to deploy artificial intelligence in some fashion during critical operations, including combat. And Anthropic's products have been used by Palantir as part of this so-called Maven system that colloquially might be thought of as Windows for War, where battlefield commanders can have access to information and have it interpreted and processed and analyzed and assessed in a much faster fashion and presented to them. Now, what this means is that within 6 months, the Pentagon must transition to a new provider. And OpenAI, an arch rival to Anthropic, is stepping in. And what they are saying also is that they are willing to take the terms that Anthropic thought were unacceptable. Terms that OpenAI says still respects its own guidelines when it comes to two key areas, and that is mass surveillance of Americans and also deployment of fully autonomous weapons. OpenAI says that the contract and the relationship with the Pentagon are strong enough that those two requirements by the firm are respected. Anthropic, from its standpoint, did not see the same in the contract language. And it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds, Carol, because the U.S. government has declared Anthropic a supply chain risk and also ordered it off U.S. government agency networks elsewhere.
And Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent talking this morning, saying that the Treasury Department is terminating all use of Anthropic products. He's following President Trump's direction on Anthropic. But of course, this is as the consumer moves in a different direction, Mike. We've actually seen Anthropic in many ways knocked offline for consumers because so many people were demanding the product and downloading it. And maybe as some sort of pushback to OpenAI, there's calls to cancel ChatGPT on the internet.
Well, that's right, Carol. We are seeing some of this popular sentiment swell in Anthropic's favor. Certainly online, there is a lot of applause in favor of Dario Amodei and what is seen as a principled stance by many against the Pentagon, against the administration, that, you know, look, if you thought that you couldn't do business with Anthropic, why not just cancel the contract? Declaring them a supply chain risk was seen by many as going a step too far and being vindictive. It's also important to remember that Claude's products are gaining popularity because many see them as quite good. And we have talked on this in this space about how much Claude is threatening to disrupt other industries, such as law, such as financial services, wealth management, you name it. And the tools that Claude offers really have some benefits. And that is yet another reason, in addition to perhaps this populist sentiment swing.
Mike Shepard, always on the news. We appreciate it so much from D.C. Let's bring in Corey Shockey, Senior Fellow and Director of Foreign and Defense Policy Studies at the American Enterprise Institute. You've been thinking about, really, the Pentagon's reaction to this. Just talk us through your thinking as to whether the step of banning Anthropic from the supply chain in this way is the right step.
It's a petulant reaction by the Secretary of Defense that's likely to turn out to be advantageous to Anthropic, but it's going to be bad for the Defense Department and bad for the security of the United States. The idea that you could either nationalize or blacklist a leading American company is outrageous, and it's going to discourage other leading-edge tech firms from being willing to expose their business by participating in the defense ecosystem.
Okay, there's going to be immediate shock, as you say, from those in the space and the reaction function of the Pentagon. But more broadly, how transparent should these sorts of conversations become at this moment? Very difficult ethical questions that seem to be shone a significant public light on by Dario Amodei, the leader of Anthropic himself.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, this is a frontier technology that we are still understanding what its consequences are going to be. And to suggest that we have less transparency or that a firm has no right to set standards on how a cutting-edge technology will be utilized by the Defense Department, I think is probably a losing proposition for DoD.
What should be forced, what could be forced by Congress? We just had a representative of California to start the show talking about wanting to bring law to bear that companies aren't pushed off of any sort of national supply chain in any retribution act. But what more broadly can be done by Congress at this moment to make clearer the lines?
Well, Congress really runs defense policy, and they can legislate in this space, and DoD will be required to be compliant with it. it's actually shocking to think that the Defense Department blacklisted an American company. That's the kind of thing we do to Chinese firms, not to patriotic American firms who are already participating in classified DoD activity.
Can you give us some guiding principles on then how OpenAI and Sam Altman might be able to find appeasement in a contract? Do you think extra steps had been taken? Is there, though, really a need at this moment for companies to see the law as it stands as where the line should be, rather than trying to insert their own language into certain contracts?
Well, it's an open question, but I do think that OpenAI is saying, yes, we trust the government that they won't use our product in a way they say they won't. And Anthropic is saying, we actually need proof and we need indemnification that our product is being used as we are advertising our product. I think given the low level of trust in the Trump Department of Defense, this is likely to be advantageous marketing for Anthropic and very difficult for DoD to be able to say, you need to trust that we will abide by the law, when so much of their behavior, including blacklisting an American company, looks to be a bending of the law, or at least an aggressive and predatory use of the law.
Corey, it's interesting, OpenAI defended, saying that it built a number of safeguards into the contract with the Pentagon and, quote, said the Pentagon actually agrees with these principles and reflects them in law and policy. When we're thinking about where AI's role now is in defense, in war, as we're currently seeing it unfold, can you just educate our audience as to how integral AI has now become?
Yes, what AI is already proving incredibly valuable for in the defense space is surveying enormous amounts of data and, for example, identifying threat portfolios. The ability to see patterns in large amounts of data. But what Anthropic is saying is we do not want it to be used for domestic surveillance of the U.S. or for decisions about the use of lethal force before we have higher confidence in the model. And those are not unreasonable standards and provide the basis for what Congress perhaps ought to put into law until we have better transparency and better understanding of what these models are capable of in future iterations.
Corey Shockey, great to speak with you of the American Enterprise Institute. We appreciate your time and expertise today. Look, as the conflict with Iran intensifies, cybersecurity experts, they're warning of a rise in Iranian-linked cyber threats targeting critical networks and infrastructure. Joining us to discuss, Cynthia Kaiser, SVP, Senior Vice President of Ransomware Research Center at Halcyon and former Deputy Director of the FBI's Cyber Division. Cynthia, are those threats real?
They are. We're already seeing Iran have real threats and conduct cyber activity against organizations in the Middle East. And we anticipate that they could follow on with operations here in the United States.
And we said infrastructure in particular. Where are the vulnerabilities likely to be targeting?
So throughout infrastructure in the Middle East and in the U.S., we see Iran target what they can get into. So it doesn't really matter the sector. It matters how the specific organization has done with their cybersecurity, has been able to fix those vulnerabilities. Because what Iran does, they go on, they try to exploit something, get into something, and then they go out in the media and they say, we've done more. So I've gotten onto one machine in an organization, but I'm going to say that we've gotten onto the entire facility and say a water treatment facility is down. So it's really a mix within critical infrastructure of getting onto something, but then moving on and lying and exaggerating to try to stoke fear and chaos.
How sophisticated is their ability to get onto something?
So they are one of the world's most malicious and capable cyber actors. In critical infrastructure overall, there are many, many devices that are connected to the internet and haven't been patched for vulnerabilities that Iran is exploiting. Just late last year, FBI put out a warning about Iranian state-sponsored actors who were targeting critical infrastructure in the United States through these types of vulnerabilities.
From the perspective that we see The market, as always, trying to get ahead of any sort of concerns and indeed, well, move money on the back of it. We've seen CrowdStrike on the higher side, seen Palo Alto Networks in the green. Are we seeing really a desire to beef up the infrastructure of resistance, to see our companies having the right place, the right sort of restraints and, well, use cases in place at the moment?
Absolutely. We've seen a lot of movement towards being able to practice incident response plans, know what you're going to do if you are hit, including what you're going to do in the media to say if something's being exaggerated, to patch devices that maybe were on some type of schedule to be patched later, doing that today, and conducting a lot of engagement across industry, as well as with the FBI, to be able to know the latest on what might be coming down and what threats that they're facing.
And the threats are all AI in many ways, I'm sure, Cynthia.
They are. We've seen a lot of AI-enabled threats, and really where we see the biggest risk with AI-enabled threats is in kind of wannabe or very low-level actors, but that's who Iran might use. Iran uses proxies to be able to conduct their activity. There's one group our Halcyon Intel team had identified named Sakari, who is currently telling its members to conduct activity, conduct attacks in the Middle East, but they've used AI to make their bad software, what they're deploying, and it doesn't work very well. But what it actually means is it destroys networks when it gets on, instead of being this kind of ransom you're going to pay to try to get back online.
Oh, so like collateral damage when actually just trying to exert financial damage. Cynthia, from the perspective of AI, look, we just come off the back of a couple of weeks where software names were pummeled, where particularly cyber companies were under pressure because people thought generative AI companies were going to be able to take their business. A plugin from Anthropic would be the answer to all our ransomware and cyber concerns. How are you seeing that evolve? How are you seeing companies actually wanting to use and build from within, or still dependent on external offerings?
So being able to build within is really important in a way to consistently know what's going on in your network, be able to fix those vulnerabilities I talked about in real time, and then be able to identify other errors or things that might be going on that are malicious across a network. But it's only going to know what's plugged into it. It's not going to have a lot of this additional information, what a threat group might be saying in a dark web forum, what's the new 0-day that might be coming down the pike. Figuring out that aspect, being able to plug the really sensitive, great information the private sector has into some of these new processes organizations do, just means cybersecurity is going to be better. It doesn't mean there's a replacement on either side.
Can you take us to allies? Can you take us as to how strong their defenses are?
Across the close allies the United States has, there are lots of sharing things implemented, as well as these sharing mechanisms where we're sitting inside different governments. They're sitting with us to be able to counter cyber threats, because this has been practiced for years. Cyber threats just don't have any boundaries. They're going across the entire world. That's especially true with our European allies, with Australian allies, with Israel. And so we have really identified ways to share quickly, share in real time these threats that are facing all of us. And we all face the same challenges, but we all can come up with the same solutions and really counter these adversaries together.
And look, Cynthia, from just an audience perspective, is this likely to be an attack that is focused in the enterprise, in one's work environment? Or could this be something that you're navigating as a consumer right now?
It's mostly going to be focused within the enterprise environment, and especially within the United States. We have seen Middle Eastern countries or organizations in those countries being targeted by Iranian state-sponsored groups in the last few days for some of the data they might have on people, whether that's patients, customers, parts and employees of that organization. We do see Iran going out trying to identify personal information for people they perceive, maybe dissidents or enemies of the Iranian regime. And that's something to watch out for there. But we haven't necessarily seen that come over to the United States or to our European allies.
Cynthia Kaiser of Halcyon and former FBI Deputy Director, we appreciate your time. Now, we are currently awaiting President Trump himself to speak. He's walking into a packed room in Washington, as you see. It is part of a Medal of Honor ceremony that is taking place today. However, over the course of the weekend and the extraordinary events unfolding in the Middle East, as US and Israel has indeed worked in partnership, and now there is war in Iran, there are many who are going to be listening in to his latest commentary regarding the next steps and indeed how this implicates the world, how it implicates allies, how it implicates the United States at the moment, and indeed access to oil. We're seeing significant moves across these markets at the moment as people worry about the supply chain, worry about the ability to continue to bring the supply that is necessary of oil, of liquefied natural gas, but also other supplies that flow through the Strait of Hormuz at the moment, which has come to a technical standstill. So we're going to be listening in to what's being said next as to the focus of the US versus Iran, and indeed whether indeed this will be of a few days or whether it will be of a few weeks. We've already heard from Secretary Hegseth earlier today. So as they listen to the opening speeches currently occurring in the White House at the moment, we'll be trying to get and understand the implications of what was, of course, the final decision of President Trump taken on Friday to go with Israel and start to focus in on Iran and the implications that had on the rest of the Middle East, of course. There have been fires coming from Iran, then taking action on allies, deemed allies in the region, as we see the UAE. Let's talk to Tyler. We're pleased to be focusing in on our White House correspondent right now. Let's go across to Tyler. Just fill us in on what we're likely to hear from President Trump, what the next steps are. We've already heard from Pete Hegseth and from the armed forces today.
Well, Caroline, at this point, there are still some top questions that we are looking for answers from President Trump on, including just how long the U.S. is willing to sustain this military campaign. As we heard from top administration officials earlier today, that they are actually surging additional resources to the region, and they are continuing what the Joint Chiefs of Staff Dan Kane said would be hundreds of missions on both land and sea. Here's President Trump is offering some of those comments right now.
So before we begin this important ceremony, and there's no ceremony that can be much more important than this, let me provide a brief update on Operation Epic Fury. Today, the United States military continues to carry out large-scale combat operations in Iran to eliminate the grave threats posed to America by this terrible terrorist regime. Following our obliteration of Iran's nuclear program in Operation Midnight Hammer a short while ago, we warned Iran not to make any attempt to rebuild at a different location because they were unable to use the ones that we so powerfully blew up. But they ignored those warnings and refused to cease their pursuit of nuclear weapons. In addition, the regime's conventional ballistic missile program was growing rapidly and dramatically, and this posed a very clear, colossal threat to America and our forces stationed overseas. The regime already had missiles capable of hitting Europe and our bases, both local and overseas, and would soon have had missiles capable of reaching our beautiful America. The purpose of this fast-growing missile program was to shield their nuclear weapon development and make it extraordinarily difficult for anyone to stop them from making these highly forbidden by us nuclear weapons. We were the ones that were complaining. We were the ones that wanted it stopped. But everybody was behind us. They just didn't have the courage to say so. An Iranian regime armed with long-range missiles and nuclear weapons would be an intolerable threat to the Middle East, but also to the American people. Our country itself would be under threat, and it was very nearly under threat. I was very proud to have knocked out the Iran nuclear deal by President Barack Hussein Obama. That was a horrible, horrible, dangerous document. They would have had nuclear weapons 3 years ago, and they would have used them. But I'll not let that happen. For almost 47 years, this regime has been attacking the United States and killing Americans. Every time you see someone with missing arms and legs or a face that's been absolutely shattered violently, it was almost certainly caused by an Iran roadside bomb. They were put there by General Soleimani, who was the father of the roadside bomb. Very proudly, he thought, but I terminated him in my first term. This was our last best chance to strike what we're doing right now and eliminate the intolerable threats posed by this sick and sinister regime. And they are indeed sick and sinister. Our objectives are clear. First, we're destroying Iran's missile capabilities, and you see that happening on an hourly basis, and their capacity to produce brand new ones, and pretty good ones they make. Second, we're annihilating their Navy. We've knocked out already 10 ships. They're at the bottom of the sea. Third, we're ensuring that the world's #1 sponsor of terror can never obtain a nuclear weapon, never going to have a nuclear weapon. I said that from the beginning. They're never going to have a nuclear weapon. They were on the road to getting one legitimately through a deal that was signed foolishly by our country. And finally, we're ensuring that the Iranian regime cannot continue to arm, fund, and direct terrorist armies outside of their borders. And we thought we had a deal, but then they backed out. And they came back, and we thought we had a deal, and they backed out. I said, you can't deal with these people. You've got to do it the right way. Today, we grieve for the 4 heroic American service members who have been killed in action and send our love and support to their families. In their memory, we continue this mission with ferocious, unyielding resolve to crush the threat this terrorist regime poses to the American people, and a threat indeed it is. We have the strongest and most powerful, by far, military in the world, and we will easily prevail. We're already substantially ahead of our time projections, but whatever the time is, it's okay. Whatever it takes, we will always, and we have right from the beginning, we projected 4 to 5 weeks, but we have capability to go far longer than that. We'll do it. Whatever somebody said today, they said, oh, well, the president wants to do it really quickly. After that, he'll get bored. I don't get bored. There's nothing boring about this. Do you agree with that, Pete? I don't think there's anything, Mr. General. I think there's nothing boring about it. Somebody actually said from the media, I think he'll get bored after about a week or two. No, we don't get bored. I never get bored. If I got bored, I wouldn't be standing here right now, I guarantee you that, to go through what I had to go through. We also projected 4 weeks to terminate the military leadership, and as you know, that was done in about an hour, so we're ahead of schedule there by a lot. But please join me in thanking every American service member who bravely is standing in harm's way. They really are incredible, and I just want to thank you. We have a lot of them right here. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. We have a lot of great service members here with us, too, in this beautiful building. Isn't it beautiful? We're adding on to the building a little bit. We're improving the building. See that nice drape? When that comes down, right now you see a very, very deep hole. But in about a year and a half from now, you're going to see a very, very beautiful building. And there's your entrance to it right there. In fact, it looks so nice, I think I'll save money on the doors, because it can't get more beautiful than that. I picked those drapes in my first term. I always like gold, but I think we can save a lot of money. I just saved curtains. But, and it'll be spectacular. It'll be the most beautiful ballroom. I believe it because I built many a ballroom. I believe it's going to be the most beautiful ballroom anywhere in the world. And when you hear all that hammering out there, you know why the First Lady is not thrilled exactly.